Hey, everybody, Fractured Logic here. So, I'm going to preface this with the fact that I am not a criminal science, political science, law, any of that. None of that stuff. I'm not, an expert on any of those things. However, I know how to do research. Now, I want to talk to you about net neutrality. The term is a misnomer to begin with. Now, let's get the big point out of the way and talk about the difference between laws and regulations. A law is something enacted by Congress, and this is on the federal level. It's enacted by Congress and then enforced by particular agencies, be it the FCC, the FTC, law enforcement, FBI, whatever. That is the responsibility, of those particular agencies that law applies to. And, of course, the police, state and local, whatever. Regulations, however, are somewhat different. Now, there are legal ramifications when you violate a regulation. But they are not actual hard-written laws. And regulations are actually very easy to change, whereas laws are a little bit more difficult. You have to introduce a new bill and convince people that you're right, what your bill is actually, better than the existing one. And it takes a while. So regulations are actually a little bit more flexible. And, it allows the difference between, a severe penalty and a minor penalty for this action or that action, whatever, So regulations are essentially laws, but they're not as inflexible as actual laws, right? Or not actual laws, I shouldn't say that, just straight laws, congressional laws. Now, the power of groups like the FCC come from congressional law. So those regulations, are under the trust, essentially, of Congress. So the FCC, has a responsibility to, use regulations in a legal sense. Does that make sense? Anyway. Net neutrality is a misnomer, though. It's not about keeping the internet neutral and free and open. Okay? The FCC in 2015, under pressure from the Obama administration, enacted regulation that said the internet is a utility. It's not. Let me explain why. In this modern day and age, we need a handful of things. We need food, of course, to survive, and water. So there's your water bill. There's your sewage bill. We need electricity. So there's your electric bill. There's your natural gas bill. There's your propane bill. But that's it. Heating, cooling, water, wastewater, and food. Now, food is a completely different necessity, right? Food's not a utility. However, all these other things that I've listed are utilities. A utility is essentially something that's essential for having a certain standard of living. You don't need the internet for a certain standard of living. You just don't. If you need internet access for any reason, you can go to your public library. Oh, what if you don't live anywhere near a library? that more than likely means you live out in farm country. Why do you need the internet in farm country? Oh, well, you need to know what weather is coming. Okay. You got the Farmer's Almanac. You can step outside. If you're a farmer, you can read weather patterns better than some freaking meteorologist with a fake degree. A degree in bullshit. Okay, so let me backtrack a little bit. Okay, meteorologists do not have a fake degree, a degree in bullshit. That is not actually true. But that being said, when you're a farmer, you have experience, you know these things. You don't need the internet to tell you that bad weather is coming. You can step outside and you can tell. Trust me, I know. Raw and uncut. Deal with it. All right, so now that we've established that regulation is technically a law, and we've established that the internet is not actually a necessary utility, let's go a step further. So, the bigger the government, the less freedom we have. It's a plain and simple fact. It's been the argument between one side or the other since the signing of the Constitution. You know, we had Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wanted a stronger central government with more rules and regulations and, you know, just bigger government. The Anti-Federalists wanted the opposite. Now, obviously, you can't have it both ways. So it requires a middle ground. You know, we do need a certain level of a strong central government, which is what we have nowadays. The problem is the central government has gotten too strong. For example, education should be a burden of the state, not the federal level. Now, that being said, the federal government can set minimum standards because of, you know, federally funded universities. You know, they all have to have the same entrance requirements, minimum entrance requirements, mind you, because like Harvard, it's harder to get into than it is to get into also. Guaranteed. But those are federal minimums, with the states being more responsible on the state level. Because the states know their populations better than the federal government does. The federal government is too far removed. So yes, a certain level of federal intervention is necessary. But when the federal government is choking the country with rules and laws and regulations, we start losing our freedoms. Now, since the FCC has don't smoke, kids, it's not good for you. Oh, Jesus. Since the FCC has ruled that the internet, after all, is not a utility, essentially regulating it to a consumer luxury, which is what it is. And trust me, I love the internet. I love the internet. But it's a luxury. And it's a luxury I pay for. Now the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is in charge of any violations that hurt consumers. Whoa. You mean somebody else is freaking running it now? It's not just utter chaos where ISPs are charging everything, you know, from $5 for Netflix to $20 for Showtime? Holy crap. So this whole panic over the FCC declaring the internet not a utility anymore was pointless. Because now the FTC is in charge of it. The FTC has consumer protections. That's their job. Federal Trade Commission, that's the whole reason they exist, is to protect consumers from unfair practices like fast lanes on the internet. So now that we've gotten the big truth out there that no one seems to understand, the FTC is regulating it now, not the FCC. Mind blown. We can talk about one other aspect, which is kind of moot at this point, but I'd like to bring it up anyway. So, during the net neutrality years, investment in fiber and other necessities for broadband internet access grind almost to a halt because of the choking regulations. Because the regulations enacted by that utility FCC Title II crap did more than just protect the consumer. They harmed ISPs, believe it or not. So, that being said, now that the internet is actually free again, because it wasn't under net neutrality laws, see why it's a misnomer? ISPs, okay, let's say for giggles, right? The FCC ended their regulation, right? Which they did. And the FTC did not take over. Which means ISPs can basically do whatever the hell they want, right? Kinda true. Okay. Now, I've heard a lot about the argument of we only have one source of internet in certain areas. Again, it's a luxury. Most of those areas are not in the cities. They're out in the country. They're very removed from, the humdrum of the main internet hubs, right? Now, I'm not saying it's fair that they only have access to one provider. And let's take an example of South Korea, okay? The entire country is wired to the internet, the entire thing, right? But South Korea is small. The United States is gigantic. We have a lot more ground to cover in order to ensure that everyone has access to the internet from multiple providers. So, is that fair to them? Technically, no. But majority rules. That's the way it goes in this country. But let's just say that one ISP is providing internet to all the farms in America because they're all removed from central hubs that have multiple providers and stuff like that. Okay. That company decides it's going to raise its rates. It's going to enact a fast lane and a slow lane. Okay? Which, if you know anything about fiber optics and programming, it takes creating a program to do that. And it's not that simple. And that kind of program could actually technically be tricked with your own program. So, there's a lot to it. It's not a simple task of just saying, oh, I'm going to pull this lever and slow down internet for anyone who's not paying an extra $50 a month. It doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. Now, let's just say that they raise their rates and do this fast lane, slow lane thing. People are going to be in an uproar. Because they're going to be pissed because they're paying extra money when they shouldn't have to. Because there's no competition. The beautiful thing about the free market system, though, is that when that one company raises its rates, and this may take a while, this may take years or even decades potentially, but this is just a for instance example of a situation that's impossible anyway. Eventually a company will come up, it will be started that will undercut that ISP. The infrastructures for these companies, it's really, really complicated, right? But let's say, take for example AT&T. AT&T has their own infrastructure. They run their own lines for their own stuff. Charter runs their own lines for their own stuff. Okay, this means a lot of fiber is out there, for competing companies. But states can actually relegate, like the power lines, that we have. They're put up by so and so and so and so, but that doesn't mean that those power lines belong to them. When you have a utility, you have a company that's responsible in a certain area geographically, something that they've been promised by a certain company. Excuse me. So, Ameren, for example, runs electricity for, where I live. Delicious. Anyway, this has gone on a while, but I'm trying to get my point across here. In this given situation, eventually a company will pop up that's going to offer less. They're going to offer the same internet for less, because there'll be a smaller company with less overhead, and they'll actually be able to provide this for you. Now, there are established fiber lines going across the nation, right? And a lot of times those are state-sponsored, just like with sewer lines or electric lines, same thing. They're state-sponsored, so those are going to be there no matter what. And then the state says, okay, AT&T, you're responsible for this section of the fiber optic cable. Something goes wrong, you need to go fix it. And that's just an example. In those situations, a company will pop up. It'll happen. It might even be one of those jilted customers that says, enough is enough. Everybody's getting screwed because they don't have access to a better internet provider, and they'll create their own company. And these are just examples, okay? So eventually, everyone's going to jump ship from that company that's charging for a fast lane into this smaller company, and that smaller company will eventually grow and become competition for that other company that was already established. That's the way it works in the United States, in a free economy, in an open market economy, in a capitalist economy. I know, scary word, capitalism. The City Seniors Inc. That's cool. Bus for seniors. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, the internet has not been completely just lawlessly deregulated to where anybody can do anything they want. That is a complete fallacy. I can see where people would draw that conclusion by what's been, posted on the news and, all the internet sensationalism over it. But like so many things on the internet, you need to do your research and actually get the facts, which is what I did. First time I heard the term net neutrality, they're getting rid of it, I was like, what? No, you can't do that. That's not okay. And then when I calmed down and I thought about it, I was like, something don't sound right. And so I did my research. I even watched the FCC hearing where they made their decisions. neutrality. And I did hear the arguments from the detractors that wanted to maintain net neutrality regulation. And they offer no actual feasible argument other than the panic that ensues from, City Seniors Inc. Anyway, all they did was play up the panic that ensues with any kind of crazy agenda. They didn't state any statistics, no facts, nothing. They just played up the whole panic button. And that sealed the deal for me. And that was after doing a ton of research. And I've actually done research since then. Because I can still have people telling me that, net neutrality is going to, the repeal of net neutrality is going to create an unfair internet. No, it's not. Because the Federal Trade Commission is now in charge of the internet instead of the FCC. That is the biggest hole in the argument for net neutrality regulation. The internet is not a necessity. It's just not. You can go about your everyday life without the internet. You really can. You may not believe me, but you can. You can still go to school, you can still go to work, you can get food, you can, do whatever you need to do. You can survive without the internet. Guaranteed. They do it all the time in other countries. Countries that don't have access to widespread internet. So the next time you think about defending net neutrality regulation, which is just big government, do a little research. And not just into your particular ideological system that makes you think that net neutrality is a necessity. Because I look at both sides. I look at both arguments. And objectively make my decisions. All I get from the pro-net neutrality folks is fear-mongering and false facts. Now, that being said, I have read a few articles that were against net neutrality and for the repeal of the regulation that were misinformed, that had falsehoods in them. So there's falsehoods on every side of every situation. There's going to be there, but you have to know how to weed through it and actually see the truth. And that is probably the hardest thing in this day and age of the internet to do. Because no matter what, somebody's lying somewhere. Somebody is skewing statistics. Statistics is... I've been through a statistics class. I fully understand the purpose behind statistics. The problem with statistics is the scope is the main thing. I can tell you that the average rent in the United States is $1,200. Seems kind of steep, doesn't it? Well, when you only survey 50 cities in order to attain this number, yeah, it's going to be steep. It's a lot cheaper to live in Wichita, Kansas than it is to live in New York City. I think we all kind of know that already. That's just kind of a common sense kind of thing. But, someone decided to do a statistical survey in order to provide a false fact. The average rent in the United States is not $1,200. In order to get the average rent in a statistically appropriate manner, you would have to survey 200-300 cities and get the average rents from all those cities. And you would have to break it up between people renting houses and people renting apartments. Just for example. Additionally, you'd have to split it up between single family incomes, dual family incomes, and single people living on their own, and dual income with no children. Because all those different factors come into play. So, the next time you're on the internet and you see somebody saying, oh, this is going to happen, blah, 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 look into it. For your sake. Not mine, because I don't give a shit if you're stupid. I have my own special brand of stupid. It's called smoking. And that's okay. That's my business. You, however, for your own sake, should do some research. And don't take my word for it about net neutrality. Go do your research. Go read the documentation from the FCC. Go read documentation from the FTC. Don't go to CBC. What the hell is CBC? What the fuck is that? What's wrong with me? Don't go by CNN. Don't go by Fox News. Don't go by the Daily Mail or the Huffington Post or the Washington Post. Don't go by any of that. Don't go by Facebook. Don't go by Instagram. Okay? Go do research in the actual government websites that give you this information. Because the government's websites cannot give you false information. Whoa! Really? Because these regulations are a matter of public knowledge. Now, I'm not saying the government doesn't lie. I'm not saying that. But all of those rules and regulations are a matter of public record. So, if you want to know the truth about net neutrality, go read the FCC regulations. Go read the FTC regulations. Now, I realize this is going on almost half an hour, and I did not intend for this video to be that long, but apparently that's how long it takes to explain all this nonsense so that people understand the truth. This has been your buddy Fractured Logic. Toodles.